Senator, every American deserves to know that people in our own government were providing support to our sworn enemy, al-Qaeda. That should not be acceptable by anyone.
Thank you. Senator Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Colonel Gabbard, when Russia was denying us use of chemical weapons, they accused the U.S. of supporting terrorists. This is a line that Putin used frequently during the Syrian civil war as he supported Assad. Syrian officials made similar comments. They did it repeatedly. They did it in public. They did it at the United Nations. In 2016, you gave an interview in which you said, and this is a quote, "The U.S. is providing direct and indirect support to terrorist groups in order to overthrow the Syrian government." And in 2019, on the Democratic presidential debate stage, you said of President Trump, this is a quote, "This current president is continuing to betray us. We were supposed to be going after al-Qaeda, but over years now, not only have we not gone after al-Qaeda, our president is supporting al-Qaeda." So I'm interested to hear, what was your goal in saying these things? And did you consider, before saying them, the motives of Iran and Russia, what their motives might have been before making these claims?
Senator, as someone who enlisted in the military specifically because of al-Qaeda's terrorist attack on 9/11 and committing myself and my life to doing what I could to defeat these terrorists, it was shocking and a betrayal to me and every person who was killed on 9/11, their families and my brothers and sisters in uniform. When, as a member of Congress, I learned about President Obama's dual programs that he had begun really to overthrow the regime of Syria, and being willing to, through the CIA's Timber Sycamore program that has now been made public, of working with and arming and equipping al-Qaeda in an effort to overthrow that regime, starting yet another regime change war in the Middle East. DoD train and equip program, again, begun under President Obama, is widely been known, looked at, and studied, that ultimately resulted in over $500 million being used to train who they called moderate rebels, but were actually fighters working with and aligned with al-Qaeda's affiliate on the ground in Syria, all to move forward with their regime change and not acknowledging what was obvious at the time and what has unfortunately borne true, which was that a regime change war in Syria, much like the regime change wars in Iraq, the toppling of Gaddafi and Mubarak, while these are all dictators, would likely result in the rise of Islamist extremists like al-Qaeda taking power. I shed no tears for the fall of the Assad regime, but today we have an Islamist extremist who is now in charge of Syria, as I said, who danced on the streets to celebrate the 9/11 attack, who ruled over Idlib with an Islamist extremist governance, and who has already begun to persecute and kill and arrest religious minorities like Christians in Syria.
I understand.
Why that should be acceptable to anyone is beyond me.
It shouldn't be.
Certainly
and
not in our
interest. I appreciate your answer, and thank you. My concern has to do with the tendency to repeat Russian and Syrian, and even in some cases, I think we'll get into in the closed session, Iranian information, and to discount what comes from our intelligence community.
Senator, every American deserves to know that people in our own government were providing support to our sworn enemy, al-Qaeda. That should not be acceptable by anyone.
Thank you.
Just think about this for a minute. Tulsi was in Congress for 8 years. In those 8 years, after learning about the Obama administration's covert policy to prop up al-Qaeda, to fund them in the Middle East, to use them to overthrow Syria's government, which, by the way, Syria's government, Bashar al-Assad, just was overthrown like 2 months ago, right at the end of the Biden administration. Well, Tulsi unabashedly told the American people the truth, something no other member of Congress has done. Now, imagine what she'll learn as DNI. The Director of National Intelligence is this country's top intel officer. She would have TS SCI clearance and a need to know That's important. She would have a need to know to be read into any black project she wants, because TSSCI, even if you have that clearance level, you could still only be read into what you have a need to know on. Well, as DNI, she has a need to know on everything. That makes her extremely dangerous. Watch this.
The fact is, what truly unsettles my political opponents is I refuse to be their puppet. I have no love for Assad or Gaddafi or any dictator. I just hate al-Qaeda. I hate that we have leaders who cozy up to Islamist extremists, minimizing them to so-called rebels. As Jake Sullivan said to Hillary Clinton, quote, al-Qaeda is on our side in Syria. Well, Syria is now controlled by an al-Qaeda offshoot, HTS, led by an Islamist jihadist who danced in the streets on 9/11 and who was responsible for the killing of many American service members.
Meanwhile, flashback.
We have responsibility, Terry. We did not have any accountability for what was going on there, and we should have. This is ridiculous. You're going to ask me in the middle of the thing when they've already breached the inaugural stuff that should we call the Capitol Police? I mean the National Guard? Why weren't the National Guard there to begin with?
They thought that they had sufficient resources.
That is not a question of how they had been. They don't know. They clearly didn't know, and I take responsibility for not having them just prepare for more.
In fact, days in advance of J6, President Trump was sitting in the Oval Office with the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and he ordered 20,000 National Guard troops to deploy to the Capitol for J6, a direct order from the President of the United States. So why weren't they deployed? Trump ordered that they deploy. It turns out that the mayor of D.C., Muriel Bowser, sent a declination order to Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, and the Sergeant-at-Arms, or the Sergeant-at-Arms. Why in the hell would they do that? Why would Muriel Bowser, Nancy Pelosi, and Chuck Schumer not want the National Guard's help on J6, even after they learned that there was going to be this massive rally taking place? I wonder why. If there was ever a smoking gun, this is it. Watch.
What were you doing on that day?
On that day specifically, responding to preparing to mobilize and deploy the National Guard once we got the lawful request from the local governing authority, which was the mayor of D.C. and the Speaker of the House.
Now, how many days in advance were you working to prepare the Department of Defense to help secure the Capitol on January 6th?
Days in advance, Senator, we were in the Oval Office on an unrelated national security matter with the President of the United States, the Secretary of Defense, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and myself. And the President authorized up to 20,000 plus National Guardsmen and women to secure any security measures necessary related to the Capitol. So we were moving to the fullest extent of the law before the requisite request came from a local governing authority days ahead of time.
And while you were Chief of Staff at DOD, how many times did DOD approach Capitol Police and ask if they needed National Guard assistance?
I believe those letters are well documented, numerous instances, and numerous of those instances, those requests were shut down.
Now, am I correct that the Capitol Sergeant-at-Arms said assistance was unnecessary?
That's correct, Senator.
Who did the Sergeant-at-Arms report to?
The Speaker of the House.
That would have been Nancy Pelosi at the time. Is that correct?
Yes, Senator.
And would that also be Chuck Schumer, then the Senate Majority Leader?
The Sergeant-at-Arms, yes, Senator, reports up there.
Did Mayor Bowser, the Democrat-elected mayor in D.C., either request or allow National Guard assistance?
She put in writing on the days leading up to January 6th a declination for National Guard additional support. And that letter is available publicly to the world.
And just to speak English for folks at home, a declination meant she said no, don't send National Guard. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
Let me ask you a simple question, because from the questioning from my Democrat colleagues, they might think otherwise. Do you condemn violence against law enforcement?
All of it.
In another story, Quinnipiac University released a new poll this week showing the Democratic Party is the most unpopular political party in American history.
This is a very different Donald Trump. He's leading a very different administration in the way he's attacking things, and the American public is very much more in line with him than they were at any point during his entire first term.
Well, I would say, correction, this is not a very different Donald Trump. This is a very different Donald Trump as being viewed by voters in this
In the way he's going about things with Susan Wiles leading things. I think he is, going at things in a much less disorganized fashion, much more organized.
Take me back in history.
Take you back in history. So it was so interesting to me that Donald Trump's first net approval rating of his second term is higher than his entire first term. And I was interested, has that ever happened? Has the second term net approval rating in the first month, have you ever had a higher rating than any net approval rating during the entire first term? Donald Trump is the only...
I have a really hard time believing this.
This is 100% true. I went back. I love spreadsheets. Donald Trump's is the first guy ever whose net approval rating in the first month of his second term is higher than any rating that he had in an entire first term, Kate Baldwin. This is true. I don't make stuff up. The numbers are the numbers.
I believe you in nothing except when you have it in the wall, and then I believe everything you say.
We're going to win so much, you may even get tired of winning, and you'll say, please, please, it's too much winning. We can't take it anymore. Mr. President, it's too much. And I'll say, no, it isn't. We have to keep winning. We have to win more. We're going to win more. We're going to win so much. I love you all.